Hey, welcome to our first episode of You're Crazy. I'm Matt Littikanen. I'm a Christian pastor.
And I'm Josh Sotomayor Einstein, a secular Jew.
There you have it. So today we are looking at our first question. We're going to be turning this one over a little bit. Is violence a legitimate force for change? And so we're kind of using as our jumping off point a Vox article, which you may have read, which was titled this, The Real Stakes in the David Shor Saga. If you don't know anything of what I just said, let me explain that to you. Let me mansplain that for you. All right? So Shor is a political analyst. So he had tweeted something that indicated that there was a data point. He's again, political analyst. He tweeted this data point that indicated that rioting was bad for the vote. He looked back in 1968, reshared some other data that had been studied, and it indicated that 2% of the vote went away from Democratic candidate, instead went to Richard Nixon in 1968 because of these riots. And so there was some fallout on Twitter. Can you imagine that? On Twitter, a fallout.
I thought that's where people go to have peaceful time and celebrate the Care Bears.
Well, that's what I thought, but I guess
good to know.
Some things to learn.
Just to sum up, he was saying that tactically, from his side's perspective, the left, because he's a man of the left, that rioting had an adverse effect on the left's vote share.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So the fallout from him sharing this is many members of the left attacked him, calling him racist, anti-black, any number of things. But, and this is just a direct quote from the Vox article, he's essentially saying mass demonstrations work, but looting and disorder are counterproductive. This was Shor's sin, repeating Wassau's findings that marching is good, but looting and vandalism are counterproductive. A former staffer for Bernie Sanders responded to Shor's tweet on Progress Files to say, we need to recognize the role data plays in this conversation, and in particular, he says, using it to dictate how BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color people should feel and protest is harmful. And so goes on to clarify that he did not say that protesting was harmful. He said that rioting was harmful and was seeking to make a distinction. So there's obviously some very there's two ways that are going from here, but to bring back to the main question, is violence a legitimate force for change? It would indicate that this article and from many of the members of the left and probably the right, although for wildly different reasons, would say that violence is an acceptable source of change, and we should pursue it.
Well, I think it depends on the context. As a member of the right, historically, I'd have to be really, really on drugs to think that violence doesn't change things. I mean, it's how we stopped the Nazis. It's how we stopped the Imperial Japanese. It's how the Vietnamese, Viet Cong and North Vietnamese communists kicked us out of Vietnam, not by offering us flowers or by protesting, but through the use of force. So in the global historical context, obviously force, can make change. The question is it right to do so? And then also in the context of a free society, such as the one we live in, is using violence, for political ends okay? And I think the answer is obviously no. We don't live in the antebellum South. For example, like if you were Harriet Tubman, helping escaped slaves to freedom in Canada, that's an inherently oppressive, state-supported system that denies the individual rights of a class of people. So if in doing so you needed to use the use of force, say to defend oneself or one's slaves that they're helping escape from, fugitive slave hunters, then I think that's legitimate. But we don't live in that country anymore. We went to war to free the slaves. We had, civil rights voting acts much later on to make sure that people were treated as individuals. And in the American context, as it stands right now, I don't believe that there is an excuse to use violence on people when you could use persuasion. I think it's actually speaks to the weakness of one's argument. Whether it was the Weather Underground, decades ago, trying to create some sort of revolutionary utopia, American domestic terrorist group that was very unsuccessful, thank God, at their bomb building. They only ever killed some of their own members. Or today, people that are rioting, trying to burn down a federal courthouse, and more often than not, just burning down, neighborhoods that are heavily minority Americans or heavily working class Americans. I mean, that doesn't really, even if one accepts the premise or I think excuse that rioters are making, and that actual protesters say they're protesting. I mean, I don't have a problem with the protesters. I think they're fundamentally wrong in their analysis, but just because someone's wrong doesn't mean they don't have the same right that I do to express themselves. But expressing yourself stops at another person's property, another person's person, and that's just the end of the line.
Yeah, no, I would agree with a lot of what you said, especially, I think broadly speaking, we can probably all assent to it to some degree. It was just and needful for America to enter in World War II. And there are all sorts of egregious sins that humanity has perpetrated that there was no talking wasn't going to solve things. You had to take force. And there's warrant for that scripturally. There's a warrant for that just historically speaking. We have things we can look back at. And yeah, so I guess really to narrow things down from just war theory, which we don't want to talk about right now. Maybe we'll get into it. No, probably not. But if we narrow things down in terms of getting social change in a nation, particularly ours, particularly on this particular issue, I think, contrary to what you're saying, I think there is some warrant for what is happening in the protests. And as you have said, I also agree that protests, it's a right. We have a First Amendment right to demonstrate and express ourselves. And I was looking in Scripture, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13. It says, "Be subject to the Lord's sake for every human institution." And I think some people would quote that and other such kind of, listen to the authorities and be subject to them and say, well, they shouldn't be protesting. Contrary to that, I would say being a good citizen in America is actually leveraging our rights. And when there is institutional injustice, perceived or otherwise, it's your right, and actually you're being a good citizen in our country to go and protest. To not protest is actually abdication of what it means to be a good citizen in this country.
Well, when you say perceived or otherwise, I think that's the $1 million question, right? It's is there really a systemic, institutionalized hunt for African Americans being perpetuated by our police officers? And I think that's a mythology. I don't think the numbers bear that out. Now, again, I don't have a problem with people who feel otherwise, who have a diametrically opposed worldview than I do. And want to express themselves peacefully. But when you said earlier, some of the things that are happening at the protests, it's kind of making, maybe unintentional, but moral cover for more than just protests to happen. And I think that's the same distinction that the person that was criticizing the Vox guy that did the study was making. They're trying to conflate protests and rioting. Yeah. And they're not the same thing. And I don't have any problem whatsoever with someone who, is a business owner or a homeowner who, there's a riot in their neighborhood, and whether a baseball bat, a knife, or a gun defends their property and their family. Because there's in Judaism, there's the idea that if someone comes out to kill you, you strike them first. You have an obligation to defend yourself. And I don't have any. I celebrate those that have chosen to defend their neighborhoods. In Minneapolis, there were a lot of pictures that were going around the conservative Facebook groups I'm in of minority, particularly black men, with wonderful, wonderful weapons defending their businesses and their neighborhoods. And that's what the Second Amendment is about. Minorities, especially, being able to defend themselves. And the first chapters of the NRA were actually in the South. Were actually founded in black communities in Reconstruction before the South went back to crazy stupidity and racism again. So I think there's a moral onus, and the onus is on people not to engage in harming others.
Sure.
What good does it do, you know, either morally or tactically to a movement to condone burning down a neighborhood business or burning down a Walmart or raiding a Tesla or just the gas or trying to burn down the gas station? I don't think it's helpful.
Hmm.
And we've all seen pictures from these riots, and a lot of them are between like 14 and 25, mostly men, and a lot of them are shouting crazy, insane, far left things, or some things that aren't even it's just so crazy they're not on the left or the right. They're just insane. Like I saw a video from a riot, either in Portland or Seattle, I can't remember which, where they were saying, chanting "Death to America." So it's not about an institutionalized, it's not about a full thought out worldview or critique. Maybe the protests are, but the rioting is not. It's about nihilistic destruction. And you have a lot of these professional activists, many of whom are white. Not that there's anything wrong with that. You can be white. That's okay. But it reminds me of Malcolm X. Malcolm X wasn't a fan of the conservative. He viewed we conservatives as wolves, but he said, what the wolf is trying to do. And he said that liberals are like foxes. They look like they have a smile. They say they want to be your friend. And in the end, they eat you just as much. And while I definitely don't think conservatives are wolves, because we just want to view everyone as an individual, I definitely think the contemporary grassroots activist liberal that's Antifa type, that's throwing petrol bombs at businesses in a neighborhood that they don't live in, I definitely think they're foxes, and they're trying to take advantage of a social movement to push their political agenda, and I think it's really, really sad.
Yeah, I mean, and on top of that, just being that it's not that we would say don't riot because it's not pragmatic.
I mean,
Like no one.
That's the argument.
That's what he's making.
Yes. Yeah.
I would not. I think, to be more morally superior position would be don't be rioting because it is injuring your neighbors. It's injuring businesses. It's injuring this economy. These people have stories. They have passions. They have dreams. There's when it comes to like Christian ethics on this question, to me this is a fourth commandment issue and a fifth commandment. Fourth commandment: honor your father and mother. Other way of looking at that, this is like honoring authority. And then fifth commandment: you shall not murder. And the way that Martin Luther explained these was there's don't do these things. You should honor your father and your mother, and this is what this looks like. And then you should not kill or you shouldn't murder. And so obviously don't do that. But here's the positive. Here's what you should do instead. And he says this: we should fear and love God so that we do not harm or hurt our neighbor in his body, but help and support him in every physical need. And so in that case, let's not riot, but let's also, what can we be doing to raise up our brothers? Pity the man who has no one to help him up. And I feel like that's a lot of individuals, whatever race that they are, that they're in a neighborhood that has not advantaged them economically, and they're kind of trapped in a cycle of poverty. Rioting doesn't help that. Rioting doesn't lift up, give the hand up. Protesting may move the needle in a meaningful way. Policy-wise, we'll probably disagree on that. But, 100% rioting, that's not going to get the job done. It's going to hurt people no matter what.
Disagreement-wise, it depends what the topic is, right? Like, it depends what people are protesting about. But what you said in terms of your quote from Luther reminds me that in Judaism, I'm sure there's something similar in Christianity. That there's different levels of tzedakah, of giving, of charity, and that the highest one is to give someone a job. That way, they're not, they don't need to ask. They don't need the help because you gave them the help in a way that's, they don't feel like they're getting the help. And then one of the lower kinds, like right below that, is giving anonymously, and so on and so forth. But again, it goes to the topic of what the protest is, and I think you could have an amazing protest movement. I think at the beginning of the whole BLM movement, there were tons of very sincere, I believe incorrect, but very sincere grassroots leader organizing marches out there, and they've seen their movement been hijacked by a bunch of, very angry lunatics who go to these cities to cause trouble. And then, people in those cities, there's like basically kids from like 14 to like 25 men, because I don't know if you guys know this, but men are dumb. We are dumb, especially when we're 14 to 25.
Oh my gosh.
I was super dumb.
Yikes.
Still am dumb. But
to say nothing of our cameraman, I don't know.
yeah, he's not dumb. He's not dumb. He's awesome. But I think the movement's been hijacked, and I think at the end of the day, even comparing to what's happening to what the movement's goals are, even though I think they're wrong, it's going to end up backfiring. You're going to see a divestment from inner cities. You're going to see a divestment from, areas where there's a heavy concentration of Black Americans, because people are going to be afraid. Not that they should be afraid, but especially when it comes to the urban centers, people aren't going to want to take a risk that their investment is going to be destroyed, and those people that can move out, Black and white, and all the other races, they're moving out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of a title, and it's honestly like I hardly remember anything from this book, but it was simply entitled "When Helping Hurts," and I think there's something connected to what you'd said about and it was a Jewish law. It's like you don't continuously give the poor something, and like in the Old Testament, they would be like do not glean to the very edge of your vineyard. Leave the remainder for the poor and the sojourner. And so there was kind of like a built-in social welfare program, I guess you could say. Chronological snobbery, I don't know what that is, but there was something built in there. But obviously the idea is that don't just leave the sojourner and person there. You bring them up to the point. And I think to what degree is welfare and the other programs that are being advocated for to what degree is helping hurting, and to what degree is it actually helping? Because I know I've interacted with a lot of individuals who are low income, who are poor, and they hit their heads up against the ceiling, and the way that policies are written, it's like if you earn this much more money, if you actually get a job, then you don't have this so you can feed your family. But it almost disincentivizes the person from getting gainful employment.
As long as we're whether Black, white, brown, Asian, it doesn't matter. We're talking about Americans, and we care about our American family.
Absolutely.
And if people need a hands up, we all our lives go through peaks and valleys. We all hit valleys. We all need help from somebody sometime. Mm-hmm. As long as that help isn't retarding, doesn't stop our progress, then it's something that's okay. But the policy agenda right now seems to be destruction, and then just like, let's defund the police. And it's like, how is that going to help anybody?
Yeah. Well, that is basically all the time that we have. But I really enjoyed this conversation, and we really would love to hear your feedback and your comments as well. So if you would like to post anything down in the comments below, as opposed to any other Facebook thread, keep it respectful, and let's just raise the bar on the quality of conversations that are worth having. And we will get back to you and maybe address some of those questions and comments in the next episode.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.